So we'll be discussing some of the political concept today. So in last two classes we have discussed about political culture and some of the other political concept like political participation, socialization, political orientations and public opinion, elections, which are also very pivotal to understand the political culture. So today I'll be discussing about some of the concept when we see nation, nationality, nationalism, which used to confuse us a lot. So when we talk about nation, how we define nation, how nation is different from state is very important to know. And also there are concepts like nationality and nationalism, which are equivalent concept, more or less similar, but at the same time we also see there is a very thin line of differences to understand that concept nationality and nationalism. So when we say nation, so nation is basically a political nation is basically a psychological concept, cultural concept, more than political concept. But when you say the state is basically a political concept, right? So it does have a legal entity. So we do have a sovereign, we do have a territory, we do have population, government, which is also a political organization, and we also have obedience, habitual obedience of the people, which will ensure legitimacy to the government and legitimacy to the political organization. That's how we identify state. So in order to have a state, we are supposed to have a territory, that is a geographical demarcation, as well as a population from whom we actually demand that habitual obedience, and a political organization which can be termed as government. Government is a political organization. So we need to have this four element to have a state. But when we say nation, nation is a feeling more than a political legal entity. It is a feeling. It is also a psychological, cultural construct, we say, which stem from the common language, common culture, common meat, common narrative, common subjugation, common economic interest, and a sense of belongingness, a feeling of belongingness. So when we talk of the nation, we actually talk about that feelings, that emotions, that psychological construct of a human being, a cultural construct of the human being. Everything derives and originates from that commonality, common language, which is also one very parameter of nation, formation of the nation. But at the same time, we also see that there are nations do not have common language. Like Switzerland, there are three languages which are being spoken by the nationalities. So we get to find three nationalities in Switzerland. Right, so not necessarily that not having a common language will weaken a state. So we might question whether all those commonality criteria or commonality parameters, if not exhibited, will weaken the state or not, or weaken the whole concept of nation or not. It's not like that. When we talk about all these parameters like language, culture, cultural commonality is also necessarily, but when you talk about the pluralism or you talk about the multicultural society, we usually believe in the salad bowl concept. We believe in a kind of cultural mosaic, that everybody will mingle with each other, and also peaceful coexistence rather than a particular promotion of one culture. So when we talk of belongingness to a geographical community is very important, even for the nation. But at the same time, we also see that people across the boundary, territorial limit, or across the geographical boundary can also call themselves as a nation because of that fellow feeling, because of that belongingness, or you see that commonality of culture, language. So across that territorial limit or boundary that we usually set, or most of the time you also see that boundary can impose a kind of nationality just because we are living in that legal entity. We are also bound to celebrate the law and order, which our constitution, we are bounded by the provision of the constitution, and that's how we can also develop a kind of commonality, and that can also be a construct of nation. But more or less, it is a fellow feeling. It is a sense of belongingness to a particular geographical territory or beyond, or even a kind of, you say, interest. When you talk about the interest, that interest among the community, made political interest, economic interest, that can also bind the people of that community and define the nationhood. You see, common economic interest that may also define the nationhood. You talk about common, even cultural interest. That is a common culture, but cultural interests are different. So you are actually talking about some kind of commonality which you haven't attained. Okay, like you talk about this subjugation. Subjugation also, common subjugation will always define a nation, because you see, African countries didn't have a history prior to colonialism. So once they are colonized, you get to find the history in African countries. So that kind of common subjugations, because we also being colonized, we Asian countries, many of the Asian countries are also being colonized, and we actually have a shared political interest and as well as economic interest, and that helps us to uh, call us call ourselves as a nation. So that kind of subjugation, what we say, subjugation from colonial power, has also, you say, help us to promote that expression, political expression called nation. So here, when I talk about political expression, so that common subjugation has created basically a kind of commonality. So it will lead to that interest, political interest, that we need to attain the statehood, we need to attain independence. Right. So hence, nation is also equated to that political construct. But more than political construct, it is a psychological construct, it is a cultural construct. But the common definition of state and nation is that state is a legal construct, political construct, but nation is a psychological and cultural construct. Then we see, when we talk about the nationalities, so there may be many nationalities which are living within a state. We also talk about nationalism. So these are also some of the equivalent concept and common concept go along with the nation. So when you talk of the nationality, what is the nationality of us? So we talk about Hindu and Indian nationality, right? We don't talk about Hindu concept, we call Indian nationality. But at the same time, we also have different facets of nationalism. You see, nationalism and nationality are similar only, but when we talk about our nationality is a kind of legal nationality, we see that come from the fellow feelings that came from the very land, very territory that we inhabit. Right, so that's a kind of nationality that we have. And when you talk about nationalism, that is also the similar concept. Okay, so nationalism is similar concept, but you see, it is much more contextualized. In every country, you get to find some context which will help you to understand nationalism or rise of nationalism, or rise of, you see, the nationhood or nationality. So it is always contextually. So nationalism and nationality is also contextual. So you may also question me, which has come before, whether state has come before or nation has come before. So it is very difficult even to distinguish whether state has come before or nation has come before, because nation is all about the feeling. So unless and until you have a feeling of like commonness, you can't bind yourself as a nation. But when you talk about the state, you need to have that habitual obedience and legitimacy from the people. So it can also go parallelly. In one country, we get to see that nationhood and statehood go parallelly, develop parallelly, and in one country, we might also see that statehood comes first and nation came later. So they have actually being acknowledged by the international organization like UN. UN has already given a kind of statehood legitimacy, and people also started obeying the political organization. But at the same time, the nationality and nationalism came later. Okay, came later just because not necessarily that each state has to come up from some kind of nationalism, or you see that it is evolved from some kind of nationalism. So there are also different, you see, contexts and the milestones in the history where we actually find that nation and state has created more than nation. We say that how that parliamentary government has come up in Europe, and even how French Revolution has created a French state, right? But that is revolution lead to state, and also you see without a revolution that lead to nations. But there are also certain state you won't find any kind of revolution, but you find that this the government order, rules, regulations, and also mandate is being legitimized by the people as well as international community. Now you see that nationalism can also be of varied type. So we have four variant of nationalism basically we can discuss. One is the very individualistic variant of nationalism, when we give emphasis on the promotion of individual liberty, equity, then justice, and rights. So individualistic nationalism is more about individual. We talk about rights of the individual, whether individual has enjoyed all the rights, all the liberties that is being bestowed upon by the constitution or not. Or if there is not a constitution, then also the claim of the individual of that community is all about enjoyment of rights and liberty. So that is an individualistic dimension of nationalism, which we get to find in Taiwan. We also have collectivist dimension of nationalism that I will write down. When we say collectivist dimension, this is more about surrendering, or you see giving primacy the interest of the nation than the interest of the individual. So US and Canada and even Chinese nationalism are collectivist nationalism. Let me tell you that we often say that US always promote individualism and liberal democracy, but in the hindsight, there is also a propaganda for universalism, for securitism, for militarism, which bind their essence of nationalism. So we actually see the kind of nationalism which is there in the US is a collectivist nationalism, because it always binds the community together, and also some of the principalities which are to be followed by all the nationalities of that particular geographical unit, and which is to be imposed upon each and every individual unit of that community, and that is also to be promoted across the world. And hence US the nationalism in US is collectivist in nature. Then we also have another nationalism that is called civic form of nationalism, when we get to find the belongingness of one people to the community and state, which is given primacy, is called the civic nationalism. So there we actually give emphasis to the belongingness of one particular community, one particular person to the community. So that is related to civic sense. We also say we do have the civic sense, the kind of civic sense that we have. So even right to have a family, so have like in a shelter. So you also you see right to even form associations, right to marriage. So these are some of the, like, civic liability, not liabilities. It's not like liabilities. These are some of the civic rights that we enjoy. So when you enjoy the civic rights, you actually find yourself at the center of the community. Okay, so you demand your civic rights and you find yourself at the center of the community, and at the same time, you also give primacy to your civic beings, and that is related to civic nationalism. It is also there in Canada. Then we also have ethnic nationalism, which has given primacy to some of the ascriptive identities. When we talk about the ascriptive identities, we do have our identities like class, caste, then occupation, our professions, our religion, our the race, gender. So when we talk about different ascription of identities, which is related to ascriptive identities, so we mainly say that our occupation and professional identities will come later, then our ascriptive identity, which will ascribe us the class that we belong to, that is the family, the gender, then the caste. So these are ascriptive identity, the ethnicity, the religion. So when we give primacy and importance to ascriptive identities, we call it the ethnic, ethnic nationalism. So we see different variant of nationalism in different countries, and even across the state, we can have two, three variant of nationalism which are coming across. So it is important to understand. Should I write down those four facets of nationalism? So okay, we see that we also have. Um, so we get to find that in India, we usually discuss more about ethnic nationalism, that nationalism around language, nationalism around, religion. So when you talk about that sentiment of nationalism, it is also highly parochial. Parochial in the sense centered or self-interest, which is also associated with that nationalism. So which is very ironic in the sense that when you talk about the nationalism, it is also based on some of the parameters like us versus them. We also see it is based on the parameters of political movement and us versus them, then racism, and also xenophobic tendencies, then political hegemony, and also you see the division and distractions, then based on the capitalism and the media, the way media is being served. Okay, so we have different is a context to understand the nationalism, and we see that nationalism is not all inclusive. We see that we try to develop a kind of commonality in terms of language, in terms of even say the religions. And when you talk about the nationalism, it is all about having that feeling of a nation. So oneness in terms of culture, oneness in terms of ethnicity, oneness in terms of the religion, and that has permeated in such a way that it created division in the society. Hence any kind of nationalistic sentiment, when you say, is very difficult to understand, because it also it is against the very nation of the class struggle, not class structure, very nation of this class struggle. It is also against the very nation of the unity of the nation. We talk about commonality and unity, but at the same time it also creates division within the society. Okay, when we talk about even the ethnic nationalism, even that lead to communalism. We talk about the religious, various kind of that identity, political identity of one particular religion, when they exhibit primacy over other religion, that has created a communalism, right? That is also creating a sense of us versus them category. So we see that there are some marker of decisiveness of nationalism. So when we talk about the marker of nationalism, or you say the decisive marker of nationalism that decides what nationalism is, we actually talk of some of those features, like you see that us versus them. That is a very important features of nationalism to understand. So it is not always about commonality. In fact, when we talk about nationalism, it emanates from the very imperialistic tendency. You see, in West also, Western imperialism or imperialistic tendencies has also created nation, helped to create nation even. So nationalism actually emanates from that imperialistic tendencies of the West, we say that Britain, and later we talk about the new imperialism, new colonialism of USA. So initially we usually talk about the imperialistic tendency of Britain and Europe, and that has even given birth to the nationalism in China. You see, so we have this four kind of nationalism. We will be discussing about those marker. So these marker are actually not that enthusiastic to understand, to even to discuss, because you see that there are a lot of polarity in those marker. Even those marker has created a polarity in the society. So nationalism has created a kind of in-group categorization. In-group categorization in the sense that we are like, superior than others, or this is about our interest. So it's just because to like to have a stake in the political organization in a very simple way, we can say, and in a positive way, we can say. But we also have a negative side of the nationalism, and which we need to find in communalism, and the more radical one, not a radical one. This is what it is, not radical. You don't have to call it radical. And the most you say that is. Disastrous one is fundamentalism. That is also a part of nationalism. So we get to find that in India we do have two kinds of nationalism. One is secular nationalism, that is basically based on composite culture. So one is secular nationalism, which you get to find secular nationalism, and that is based on the composite culture, nationalism in India. And another one is religious fundamentalism. Religious fundamentalism, or we can say that Hindutva nationalism, we call it Hindutva nationalism, which actually permeated into the social structure of India, and we call Hindutva nationalism, and which actually defined a very character of Indian polity nowadays. Where we do not have any escape to say that those are the defining features of Indian polity. So when we talk about secular nationalism, it actually came from the philosophy of Jawaharlal Nehru, having a composite culture. That we talk about the Sufi and Bhakti movement. So the composite culture, that also synthesis of all the all all the elements of both the religions, of different religions. So that has created a composite culture in India. We call it syncretism. We also call it that cohabitions. We believe in that tolerance, peaceful coexistence. So these are some of the tenets came from the secular nationalism. So when we actually see how constitution define us, so we the people of India solemnly resolve ourselves to be sovereign, secular, democratic republic, right? So when we talk about the secular word is already enshrined, and that is actually based on peaceful coexistence and tolerance. So secular nationalism is based on the principalities of peaceful coexistence, non-violence, and tolerance. But when you talk about the religious fundamentalism, that is based on the principle on hate speech, violence, and also target to minorities. Okay, so now you see that in order to understand these two very basic national types of nationalism, you also need to understand the context of Indian nationalism. You see, the Indian nationalism, the context, if you see, was the British Raj, right? British Raj has actually created that kind of nationalistic feeling. So when we actually see how culturally, socially, politically, economically, we have achieved something from British Raj. So what we have achieved from the British Raj, which have already made us to help us that sentiment, cultivate that sentiment of being nation. So what we have achieved from the British Raj, that is a question. Okay, so first, culturally, what we have achieved is that we come in contact with the West. That's what we have achieved from the British Raj or colonial, like hegemony, colonial power. That we came in contact with the West, which helped us to question the evil practices which permeated in India, like Satida Pratha, some of the evil tendencies, superstition, bigotry, which was there already, which were there in Indian society. Those were being interrogated by the intelligentsia after they came in contact with the Western education. So perhaps culturally we have achieved that we started interrogating, started questioning the evil. So that's what we have achieved. Educationally, yeah, we have achieved English education by virtue of Macaulay Minute, so, because Macaulay wanted to create a class of interpreters who will be Indian in blood and color, right, and race, and English and British in moral philosophy, in intellect, and opinion. So that's how educationally what we have achieved. That English education we have achieved, and we also learned the value of certain political theory like justice, liberty, equity, which were not very core to the Indian philosophy. So justice, liberty, equity were there in Indian philosophy, but we need to dissect it. But these are the values we get to find from the West. So about liberal democracy. And then administratively, what we have achieved, we have also achieved a system of bureaucracy, right? Bureaucracy and merit-based bureaucracy. So we talk about merit-based bureaucracy. Nowadays, we don't talk about merit-based bureaucracy anywhere. Say we have a spoil system. So those who are closer to the administrations have got, you see, the appointment. But we have a merit-based bureaucracy here, which we actually inherited from British, but we cannot retain and sustain it. So that we have achieved, and also a hierarchical system in administrations in terms of rule of law, impartial order, objectivity. That's what we have achieved administratively. So we also came across various reforms in administrative laws, and we try to have an impartial outlook into any laws. Okay, outlook of laws, and we need to have that lens, impartial lens, objective lens, to evaluate any kind of laws, any kind of orders, any kind of situation. Then also socially, what we have achieved socially, you cannot say that we have a two socially and economically our cottage industries have collapsed completely. Our handicraft industry, cottage industry is completely collapsed. Okay, so we haven't achieved much. Socially also, we get to see some kind of decisive tendencies which has permeated at the same time. So like two nation theory, we talk about divide and rule policies, which also created partitions between two communities, two nations even, and created some kind of cleavages between the communities, among caste, among communities. So which actually lived in harmony. Communities across India lived in harmony, developed that polarizing tendencies and cluster effect, and we get to find that they started claiming for their parochial interest. They started call for fulfilling their parochial interest. Okay, so that kind of achievement that we have from the British rule. We also say politically what we have achieved. We have actually achieved a political unity, right? We have achieved that unity that we can call a state. Right. So, so that is the context. You need to understand the context of nationalism in India. So, context of nationalism is the British Raj, which helps us to you see that stem that feelings of nationalism, rise that feelings of nationalism. Now you see that when we talk about the two groups like moderate and extremist, I'm not going to go that detail, so I'm cutting it short. by saying that there were two groups which uh, had a stake in Indian nationalism. So we also have that moderates, they believe in prayer and petition in terms of bringing constitutional reform, administrative reform, economic reforms, agrarian reforms in the society. And we also had radicals who didn't believe in that political mendicancy, we say that prayer, petition, and writing to the government. Rather, they believe in direct actions and civil disobedience, boycott, protest, etc. So that is a kind of extremist, but you don't have to equate extremist with a terrorist. So their strategy is different. Their strategy is to go for direct action, go for protest, hartal, boycott. So we have already discussed about different tactics of direct actions. Instead of simply writing to the government and requesting government that we want a stake in the legislature to also discuss the laws that you have brought for us. So instead of writing government for any kind of constitutional and legal reforms, they said that this kind of political mendicancy will not help us to achieve our objective, and that is the full independence. So Purna Charas, we call it. So we see that there are certain reforms which we get to find, agrarian reforms, about which moderate also wrote. Na? So you need to know the context. Now you see the context of nationalism. When you understand the context, you see the condition of agriculture. So 70% of population still hold agriculture land. So we talk about that time also we talk about irrigation facilities. We talk about that credit facilities, subsidies in credit facilities for the farmers and all. We also talked about, you see, that refurbishing and revamping this handloom, that died handloom industries at that period of time. And now also we have been talking of the same interest. So that the kind of interest has not been changed. So I'm not saying that this is something very different, but over the years, you see, the kind of interest has not been changed over the years. After independence, also the claims, the interest, political interest, economic interest of the community has not been changed. Indian community has not been changed. But that has given rise to nationalism. And also, it has strengthened the fellow feeling among the people. So when they realize the common economic interest, social interest, okay, that realized there, you see, their importance of being sovereign. So there we find the collectivist nationalism. We also find individual nationalism, ethnics. We actually merge of all. You see this amalgamation. All four nationalisms are uh, being expressed in our form of nationalism. When you talk about the rights, yeah, there were also committees which focused on enjoyment of the right, enjoyment of even that right to religion, right to free speech and expressions, which are being highlighted at different Congress committees. And then collectivist right, nationalism. When you talk about collectivist nationalism, we simply in Indian context, what we say that uh, our desire for nationalism is a kind of collectivist nationalism. That our desire at that to have that, not desire for independence is a collectivist nationalism. And civic nationalism, it is also civic sense which have developed among even female also. Civic sense have developed. They also came up. They take part in various meetings. Although there was a veil which always you see. Bifurcate women communities, or you say that make them away from sitting along with the male community, but still you see that they came out from the confinement of home, and they take part in national struggle. And that is a kind of civic nationalism which has developed. And then ethnic nationalism. So you actually see that at that point of time, Muslim League also formed. They talk about separate electorate. There is also separate electorate based on caste demanded by B.R. Ambedkar because of the situation of the caste at that point of, that is Dalit and Harijans. Because of the situation of, you see, the Muslim, which has have been relegated to minority communities, and they also demanded separate electorate. So you see that ethnic nationalism was also quite acute during that period of time. So we get to see expression of four kinds of nationalism, even in Indian nationalism during, pre-independence era. And secular nationalism, that a concept that we come up with after independence. And then after independence, up to another 30 years, 30 40 years, then thereafter we get to see emergence of the religious fundamentalism. But origin of religious fundamentalism, it dates back to that prior to independence era, when we actually focus on the rights of the Hindus, and also we talk about a Hindu land, Akhand Bharat, after the partitions. So that demand for Akhand Bharat was very acute, especially because of communal organization like RSS, like Hindu Mahasabha, and we also have Vishwa Hindu Parishad. They demanded Akhand Bharat, that Pakistan has got their own land, we should also have our own land, and that should protect the right of the Hindus. So that is religious fundamentalism. So, how fundamentalism is different from nationalism? This is also important now. So, we call it that nationalism involves parochial tendencies. There are some marker. One is the very commonality, feelings of commonality, that is the nationality. And the political movement, that is also marker, political movement and organization, and a desire to have a political organization can create nationalism, create a feelings of nationalism or nationality. So that is another marker. And us versus them or in group category is the third marker. You also see that us versus them, the tendency is always there, that we as a nation is separate from you. We as a nation, we as a religion, we as a caste, we as a class, separate from you. Okay, so that is a kind of us versus them tendency, which is always there. And also against the, you see, class struggle. Class struggle, when we talk about the class struggle, that is another marker, is that nationalism always focused on, this is called inclusive and exclusive exploitation. There is also inclusive exploitation, so we call it exploitation, and that is inclusive. What happened? Okay, in exploitation, so it also permeate exploitation of even one class over the other, that too within the community. Okay, but at the same time, they are trying to corroborate everybody as one community, but also it give legitimacy to exploitation of one class over other. So you be within this community fold, but also you say that you need to follow that hegemonic order. So that is a kind of exploitations which is there in nationalism, although it is inclusive, and that is, and we see the exclusion. Exclusion means it always at war with other group, or who it consider other, so always at war. And you also talk about international war. Now if we understand nationalism in US context, we try to equate it with international war and all. Okay, so briefly, before we understand religious fundamentalism and marker of is a religious fundamentalism. Briefly, we discuss about the facets of nationalism in US. So, US, the kind of nationalism which we call collectivistic nationalism, has got expression in what? In universalism. So, one is universalism. Universalism. One is universalism. Second is militarism. Militarism. that is called US nationalism, you see. So it will help you to understand those markers of nationalism in that way when we discuss about universalism, militarism. Then we have another tendency that is called securitism. Fourth one is humanitarian intervention. Humanitarian intervention. So here you talk about the universalism. US consider that the values, principles, ethos of US is supreme and it is to be followed by all countries of the world. And hence it will impose those values, principalities, ethos, philosophies to other countries by hook or by crook. So that is a kind of nationalism that US has. It considered the rights. You talk about the human rights. You talk about that liberal democracy, okay, and capitalism are supreme form of any kind of polity, and hence it is to be followed by other countries. And hence the very essence of nationalism in US is collectivist, you see, because they always talk about, like, community. They give primacy to community over individual. So they actually want to create a world community which will follow their own values, ethos, their political order, their social order, their economic order. So universalism is the very basic feature of US nationalism. Okay, so we get to see a lot of annexations, disannexations, which captured the Madurai. They have also absconded him. So it's like, you see, all these kind of activities are related to, you see, universalism. Then we talk about the militarism. Militarism, so you see this bolstering the arsenal. They try to develop more and more arms and immunities. But at the same time, they will deter the developing countries and other states to develop that arm and immunities. So you see the kind of self, versus them categorization, in out categorization. They will develop the stockpile of arms and immunities, but they will not later developing countries and other countries to develop arm and immunities, which we get to find expression in terms of, like, India. Okay, so India, when denied to sign the NPT, you see that India had to get imposed lot of sanctions from USA. So that is a kind of militarism which is there, which is also related to securitism or securitization. So he said that we are there, we are bestowed upon the role of providing security to entire world, all the countries. And hence, so we can also we have the power, and we have conferred ourselves the power to go for humanitarian intervention, intervene any countries which doesn't follow our ethos, our laws, or which have authoritarian form of government, which have a communist government, because it is not in line with our ethos and philosophy. So we will intervene, and on the basis of the claim that there is human rights violation. So we will intervene without even taking permission from the United Nations organization. We will intervene and try to restore peace in that particular country. So that is what humanitarian intervention. So these four, you see, objectives of UN are also aligned. Okay, so all these four, you see, objectives of UNs, or you see these facets of nationalism, are related to in-out categorization, that category in, or you see us versus them. Okay, so those who do not follow our ethos philosophies are others. They are supposed to be exterminated. In a way, that is also similar, you see, philosophy we get to find in Nazism and fascism. And let me tell you, when we discuss about the religious fundamentalism, the rise of religious fundamentalism in India, so it actually rose during that context when we see that Mussolini ruled Italy, and also Hitler was about to capture the power of Germany. So that was the context of religious fundamentalism in India, and hence they believe in fascism and Nazism. And in every way, we get to see from their dress code, from their behavioral intent, we get to find, and also a kind of discipline, and the philosophy of exterminating, or you see, eliminating one race who doesn't follow our ethos, is the very tendency of religious fundamentalism. And in a way, that kind of ethos you get to find in the facets of nationalism of USA. Unlike USA, let me tell you, Chinese nationalism is very different and very, you see, when you say different, it will not be the right word. It means very, very rooted in culture. Okay, so Chinese nationalism talks about nativism. It is talking about pragmatism. It is talking about you see, this um, ultra nationalism. So all are, when you talk about nativism, that is basically about the Confucianism, that religion that has been propagated, that believing in that religion, and that you see that Chinese nationalism actually stemmed from the humiliation of Chinese people from the Europe during opium year. So years of humiliation has created a kind of nationalism in China. So they are not supposed to leave the roots. They are not supposed to think beyond their culture. Okay, but at the same time, they also have pragmatism, that they have adored that capitalism now, that liberalism, and in the way private sector investment in order to fulfill their economic interest. Okay, so hence we see that we have different varieties of nationalism. But when we talk about secular nationalism and religious fundamentalism, it is also associated with culture. That is called cultural revivalism in India. But you see, there is a difference between cultural revivalism and you see the religious militancy. So, what is the difference between growth of religion or you see growth of militancy? We talk about growth of religion. Growth of religion is important for cultural revivalism, where we actually understand the majesty of one particular religion, of the scriptures, majesty of scriptures, and the textbooks and literatures and the tenets of that particular religions and the traditions. So that's what is equated to growth of one particular religion. If we talk about religious fundamentalism as a facet of, you see, nationalism. But when we talk about religious militancy, we are not talking about cultural revivalism here. We are not talking about majesty of Vedas. Here we are talking about hate speech. We are talking about hate speech against one community. We are talking about that degree of violence. We are talking about how minorities are targeted. We are talking about the use of media indiscriminately in order to promote the self interest of that particular group. Okay, so that's how we equate with religious militancy, and also it is also philosophy of terminating the other group which will not follow our ethos. So, hence there are differences. Okay, but we have come up. We also say that when we talk about evolution of one particular organization, so when what was the, you see, context of that organization when it evolves? What were the philosophies? What were the objectives it dealt with during the time of origin, and how it is evolved over the years, and where it is now is also important. When we talk about even the communalism in India, there are different types of communalism, be it Hindu communalism, Muslim communalism, Christian communalism, Sikh communalism, when we see religion is not separated from the state. Okay. Hence, these are some of the concepts which are very, very important in understanding political communication. Without understanding this concept, it's very difficult to even write an opinion piece, to become a strategist. Okay, because when we talk about the secularism, it is all about separating religion from the state. Why we have emphasized on secular nationalism, and we are separating religion from the state, and we treat all religion equally. So it has based on the three principles. One is equality of all religions, treating all religions equally, and separating the private affairs from public. Private affairs is the religion, from the public, from the state. Okay, and basically two ideas. So here, when you talk about the secular nationalism, we also see that we need to see first what is secularism, then we need to identify it with communalism. Have you seen someone in front of you? No, no. So we talk about communalism then. So when you talk about separating religion from the state, that is secularism. And here in communalism, what we say, we are mixing religion with politics. Huh. And that too in the name of, you see, in the name of having a fellow feeling of nationhood. Are you getting? And hence it is important. So communalism, it is equated to religious fundamentalism. Okay? And we talk about extremist, it is not about extremism. It is not about religious extremism. Extremism is another, like, word which is also equated to violence. Okay? So religious fundamentalism is equated to violence. So when we study violence, violence has also a different word concept you need to understand. It is all about use of force, and how use of force save the direction, save the mobility, save the structure, save the nature. So it's all about use of force. So when you drive, how you will drive, the force that you exert while like shutting the door. So it is inherent in those concepts. So the kind of intent and also the choice. So when you talk of the violence, it is also related to your intent. It is related to the choice you have and intent you have. If you doesn't have any intent, but okay, sometimes out of, like, time pressure or different kind of pressure or state situation, you might have, like, might have acted aggressively. So was that the intent? And was there any choice that you don't have to be aggressive and you can be simply moderate? Okay, so at philosophical level, we actually need to understand the justification of religious fundamentalism, because this is equated with violence. This is also equated, we talk about communalism. In understanding communalism, we need to understand certain parameters like mass mobilization, degree of cohesion, degree of violence, then leadership, then we talk about flare up, then the target, then we talk about the aftermath consequence situation. So when we talk of when we understand the communalism, it is all about community fellow feeling, no, community well-being. But you give primacy to your community over others. Here also same, you give primacy to your religion over others. But yes, there are certain characteristics, ideological characteristics and organizational characteristics that will help you to call yourself as religious fundamentalism. What are those characteristics? What are the ideological characteristics that you are supposed to have to call yourself as religious fundamentalist? I hope none of you will drive yourself to that direction, but yes. So when can I call you as religious fundamentalist, or when can I call a group religious fundamentalist group? When I see some of the ideological features, some of the organizational features in that group, which uh, I will discuss now, then you can identify that okay, group is fundamentalist group. One is you get to find that is an ideological character. One, let me. I'll, so after this, I'll finish. Okay, you understood, no? You understood. All of you understood. Okay. And then we have organizational character. When we talk of ideological character, what can be ideological character? One is the messianistic rule. Messiah. We get to find that messiah concept, which you get to find ideology that identity. There is a messiah which will save you from all the ill. There is one messiah. So that is an ideological characteristics only. There is a messiah. And in organizational characteristics, what we have? We have the, let me tell you, we have a charismatic leader here. So we emphasize on charismatic leader. And along with charismatic leader, we also emphasize upon specific behavioral code. Specific behavioral code. We will emphasize on charismatic leader, then we will emphasize on specific behavioral code that our individual identity is submitted to group identity. So we cannot claim any kind of individual identity. So it is submitted to, okay, organizational identity or group identity. And also charismatic leader always looks for a charismatic leader who can is it influence us to believe in faith. Then we also have absolutism. 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 Absolutism in interpreting the text. Interpreting the text. So text and scriptures. We actually say when we, what when we specific behavioral code is there, which will help one individual. The thing is that So okay, yeah, I'll tell you. I'll tell you. You write down. Okay. So we have organizational character, like we have a specific behavioral code, which they will determine that you need to behave in such a way, and your individual identity should be subsumed to group identity and organizational identity. You cannot claim any kind of individual identity. Okay, that is an organizational, you see, characteristics of religious fundamentalism. And also they always have a charismatic leader. They look for a charismatic leader to to bring support from the people on one particular faith. Okay, so unlike that in ideological character, we also have absolutism in interpreting any text. When you talk about the text here, text in terms of media text, in terms of religious text, in terms of scriptures, absolutism. You see that when you talk about Saraswati Sichu Niketan, some of you might have read, or Vidya Bharati. These are the schools which is sponsored by RSS sponsored school, which are also there in you see that North India, even in Northeast India. In Vidya Bharati, in even Saraswati Vidya Mandir, we get to see there are 6,000 schools which also raised to like 10,000, and then there are teachers recruited. Okay, that is also more than you see 14,000 teachers recruited, and also more than 18 lakh schools, students who actually read in schools. And the kind of textbook they usually get, and the language in the textbook which you actually find is very crude and very absolute. They simply denote one community as kafir. Okay, so the language is full of hate speeches. So very crude language they usually use. They create us versus them in the textbook only to also you see um, that sideline one particular community as other. So the way they you see write the text and the way they read the text, so it is absolutism in the text, absolutism in interpreting the text. Even you see when they say that Muhammad bin Tughlaq or Muhammad Ghazni are that is are responsible, that are one who has looted the country, etc., etc. Okay, and at the same time this kind of absolutism you get to find even in Muslim communalism when they consider Shivaji and all, which are kafir. Like, so kind of language which they use, and which is also integrated with that hate speech. Okay, so identifying one as you see as someone which is despicable. Okay, so a kind of language you get to find in the textbook itself. Okay, so that is there in ideological level. You get to find that absolutism. Okay, Iran say. So that is a hate speech. It's full of hate. So you get to find in ideological character is full of hate speech, and also that try to raise the negative emotions of the people. So that's a absolute character. Also, you see. मैं अभी तुम ये मत करो मैं ये इसका ले लेता हूँ कुछ समझ में नहीं आ रहा है मैम can you please close this one which one नहीं अभी छोड़ने वाली हूँ अभी तो कल नेक्स्ट क्लास में बताऊंगी इसके बारे में मुझे लग रहा है you got the enthusiastic knowing about religious fundamentalism you don't need to okay yeah. So, okay, listen. We'll be discussing about religious fundamentalism because you see it is also related to our religious right. So, we talk about that Messiah, that we are the Messiah, we can save you from the other community, and he's doing you actually see this kind of tendency which we have seen nowadays even in Assam. Okay, that kind of fundamentalistic statement that often it is also permeated across the society. Okay, so it is important to understand, but you see more than that what is important is that you see they also have a selective modernity. So selective modernity is also one ideological tenet, let me tell you. So when we talk about the concept like democracy, modernity, these are very important concept along with the nationalism. So what is modernity? So we have discussed about modernity that it is a process of social change, right? Modernity is a process of social change when a less developed countries acquire the attribute of more developed countries. This is also related to, you see, that nationalism as well as fundamentalism, or you call secular nationalism, religious fundamentalism. In religious fundamentalism, they always highlight selective modernity. They will highlight the modernity that they prefer and they have brought on the basis of the development which is being taken place during their rule. So that is the modernity, that is the kind of modernity, selective modernity, that you always get. Okay, so but modernity, how we understand modernity, it is all about, you see, diffusion of, okay, okay, yeah, one is diffusion of modernity means diffusion of secular and rational interest and norms and values in the society, right? So, whether it is there in religious and ideological orientation. So, we'll get back to it. And also about this participation of people in the society. Okay? How modernity is being defined by religious fundamentalist is important. So, we'll discuss about it in the next class. And if you have any question, you can ask.